Ствол забери.
Those are the kinds of tensions we are seeing in Ukraine. Dr. Lada Roslicki joins us, foreign advisor to the Public Commission for the Investigation and Prevention of Human Rights Abuses in Ukraine. And Doctor, we talked about the situation as it stands right now, and you talked about the interim government. But what are the options that are open to Ukraine at this moment? I mean, what do you think they're talking about in Geneva?
I'm afraid that they're talking about the federalization of Ukraine. So basically chopping it up into little pieces. East goes to Russia, or at least Russian oversight and control. Crimea belongs to Russia already, so to speak, and the West could go to Western powers. This is probably the hard line that the Russians are playing. Ukraine has a lot to gain here, actually. Ukraine can ask officially for support from the West. NATO allies are already maneuvering. It comes down to the interim government stepping up to the plate and doing what the people from the Maidan revolution asked them to, because they're not at this point.
Okay, but in terms of economics, we've seen sanctions, albeit cursory sanctions, but sanctions imposed on the Russians, those kinds of things. Is there anything that can be done by the EU and the United States to crank up the pressure on Russia?
Absolutely. The best thing that they could do is to make their aid money contingent on Ukraine stopping the sales of its military equipment and technology to the Russians. If Ukraine is forced to stop, Russia has nothing to sell. Or no arms to even use against the Ukrainians. Particularly, the Russian Federation can no longer be a nuclear state without Ukraine's support. That's how serious it is.
Okay, so there are still nuclear facilities that the Ukrainians control then? I wasn't even aware of that.
And nuclear technology, certain engines that all helicopters are being used by the Russians come from Ukraine. Satan missile, which is a nuclear missile, is fully dependent on Ukrainian technology. So the negotiators should really consider just hammering it down and saying, Ukraine, if you're not going to defend yourself and provide your enemy military weapons, we will do everything within our power to make sure you protect yourself. And it will be relatively cheap for the West to do so.
Okay, but Doctor, are those facilities that are manufacturing those goods, the military, if you will, goods to Russia, are those located in eastern Ukraine?
Yes,
and is that in part why Russia wants eastern Ukraine?
You've got it. That's one of the main reasons that they're taking over these areas. They need to have control over the military industry. Otherwise, Russia has a very, very weak military industry, which is a positive thing for the Western allies if this situation is handled correctly.
Okay, well, the caveat is that the Ukrainians may say, we're not going to ship you any more of those, and then 40,000 Russian soldiers come across the border and take over eastern Ukraine. How big is that risk?
It's a big risk, and this is why, once again, Western allies really need to come in and help the Ukrainians take care of themselves, because clearly the situation is spinning out of control, and sanctions, although effective, aren't effective at this moment. It's very necessary to pay attention to Transnistria. Once again, yesterday Transnistria, the so-called government of Transnistria, has asked Putin to come and help them get away from Moldova.
Oh, okay, that's a whole different story, and
Right.
and we could get there eventually. But let's talk about other tools that Ukraine could use. For instance, there's pipelines that come from Russia. Russia needs that oil money. Could the Ukrainians shut off the pipelines and therefore choke off the money that's going to Russia?
Ukraine can do that, but I'm not really certain how happy the European Union would be with Ukraine suddenly shutting down the pipelines. Ukraine could also shut down the water and pipelines to Crimea, but they haven't done this yet. Ukraine, actually probably the smartest thing to do for Ukraine would be to say, look, we really need your help, military help, and do the same, use the same tactics the Russians are using, and use pipelines and electricity as a game breaker. But they're not doing that.
We are, for instance, hearing that Canadian forces, CF-18s and planes, are being committed to NATO, and there could be exercises in Eastern Europe. Do you think that the stirrings are there for NATO to intervene in this, or at least, bang some drums?
NATO must intervene to spare international peace at this point. Absolutely. Men on the ground, technical capacity is there, interoperability is there. Ukraine has worked very long with the Partnership for Peace program, and where we are lacking interoperability, there are NATO member states that have Soviet-style weapons that they can actually hand over to the Ukrainians. The question is, who do you hand it over to?
Yeah, because we're in the interim government. How do you anticipate the interim government will play out? Because you do have elections pending.
Following what is going on right now, I have a feeling that they're going to go and lean towards federalization. They're going to give up to the demands of the Russian Federation, and this is where Putin's warning that a civil war may be breaking out in Ukraine may come true, because the Ukrainian citizens really do not want to break up the country. Military men from the Ukrainian side have actually been sent out to the east with no food for 4 days, and little old ladies in eastern parts of Ukraine where the Russians are invading are actually feeding the soldiers. It's absolutely absurd, the situation.
Is it ever? Doctor, I'm sure there's no easy solution, so we will be back to you. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much as well.